Welcome, everybody. Tonight we're here welcoming you to Let's Get There Green, presented by Transition Salt Spring. My name is Darlene Gage, and I'm the programs manager here with TSS. Super honored to be here with all of you tonight and our distinguished guest to talk about how we can shift our ways of moving around our community with less impact on our increasingly fragile ecosystems. So the Coast Salish people, who stewarded these lands since time immemorial, knew well how to get around here with almost no harm done to the forests and everything that lives in them, including people, because we happen to be part of the ecosystem, interestingly enough. In fact, they were so good at getting where they needed to go without leaving a trace that many people still to this day, I will hear people on Salt Spring say that Coast Salish people did not have permanent homes on Salt Spring Island, and they were only on the island for certain seasons. And this somehow continues to give the impression that there are a few sort of land claims on the island, as there were not permanent settlements. So interestingly, I just recently learned myself from Chris Arnett, who's a local archaeologist and historian, that in fact the Hokaminam and Sanchothan speaking peoples had villages here for hundreds of years, but what they would do is dismantle them during certain seasons and transport them to other areas in the Salish Sea in order to fish and to hunt and collect food. So this was especially during salmon season at the mouth of the Fraser River. They would literally recreate their homes and their villages in another spot using large canoes and transport systems to transport all of their goods, their food, and their buildings. I think that is incredible and amazing. And so we certainly have a few things to learn from their example of living lightly on the land and transporting ourselves around using sustainable technology, which is what we're here to talk about tonight. So I raise my hands and say Haichkasiem for those land and water stewards who came before us and from whom we have a lot to learn. So that brings us to tonight. Our focus this evening will be on transportation on Salt Spring Island, starting with an overview of what the Salt Spring Island Climate Action Plan has to say about transportation. We have an incredible array of guests here tonight to help us learn about the best ways that we can shift our transportation systems to ones that will function efficiently in our new climate reality. That includes Rob Fleming, the BC Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure, and Adam Olsen, our MLA for Saanich and the Gulf Islands, along with some local transportation champions, many of whom are also climate champions. We know there are many of you joining us here tonight who've been working for years to improve local transportation and cycling infrastructure. So you will have the chance to share your thoughts and your questions in the chat box, and we'll be doing our best to communicate these to our speakers. So please use your chat box actively tonight, folks, and we will be transmitting those off to our speakers for the evening. After the meeting, we'll send out links to you on the various topics that were covered tonight. And if there's any unanswered questions that come out of this evening, we're going to be passing those along to all the guests, and hopefully you'll be getting a response in writing from them. So don't worry, your voices will be heard. We plan to end the evening by 8 o'clock this evening, so it's going to be fun and interesting, and we look forward to hearing from you throughout the night in the chat box. Super pleased now to introduce Bryan Young, Chair of Transition Salt Spring and a lead author of our climate action plan for the island, to start us off on our action-packed agenda for tonight. Over to you, Bryan.
Yeah, thank you. And just I wanted to say, Haichka, to you for that, that land acknowledgement. I think that we're really trying at Transition to not just we're grateful to be here on this land and then move on, but really try and make a more meaningful land acknowledgement. So I just wanted to say thank you for that one. Also, one thing to mention to everyone is that tomorrow is Ask Salt Spring. And it just so happens that at the beginning of every month, the first Friday of every month, Adam Olsen is there. So if all of your questions about the meaning of life and all the rest of it don't get aired tonight, tomorrow you can ask those questions. Also, Adam Olsen has expressed a willingness and indeed an interest in participating with us with a deeper dive into some of these transportation, green transportation issues. So we're working on that. So we want to hear from you. And we'll remind you again tonight about that. But if you're interested in a deeper dive on this kind of stuff in a Zoomy type way, just please let us know in the chat what you think of that idea. But what I'm going to do, actually, we're going to launch a poll, aren't we, Erin? We want to get your kind of fingers going with the keyboards. We have our first poll of the evening that we want to ask you. What are your transportation priorities? So take a look up on your screen of your iPad or your computer. You should see a list of choices there. And all you have to do is move your mouse to the ones that you think are the priorities. And I will try to remember the scores so I can remind the minister of these when we have our conversation starting at the bottom of the hour. So just click. I'm going to do the same. Absolutely, absolutely. I'm not sure. I can't see Erin, just so you know, I can't see
We're seeing a huge majority of people saying safe bike lanes from Fulford to Vesuvius is definitely coming in number one.
Cool.
More pedestrian and mobility scooter paths in the village is bringing up the rear. And then we have traffic calming and lower speed limits in Ganges. So hooray for that.
Can we share the results on the screen if you think it's time?
Still a few more votes coming in.
Okay. Come on, stragglers.
Yeah, it continues. Even with all the votes coming in, we're still seeing the safe bike lane, the Salish Sea Trail, come in at number one by a landslide.
Oh, awesome. Look at that. Safe bike lanes. I love it. You know, this is consistent too. I'll share that with you in a moment with a survey we did through the Climate Action Plan. So this is really interesting to see. Yep, top one, safe bike lanes, followed by a virtual tie on a number of the others. So thanks everyone for participating in that. That gets us our fingers moving at least. And they'll need to move tonight in terms of when we're starting a section of the any section of the time with our guests. If you think of questions, just hammer them into the chat. We will, as Darlene said, do our very best to get them brought to the table, but know that it may be difficult because I think we've got a lot of folks who have some things that they want to say. So thank you, good day to you, and we are in the Sinchothan speaking areas of the Salish Sea, but also Hokominum. So High Squatchel is the way it's said in Sinchothan, and it's said slightly differently in Hokominum is Aisquail. So I welcome all of you here tonight. So I'm here to give a very kind of capsule summary of what we talked about in this thing called the Climate Action Plan, which was released just over a year ago now. And what a year it's been. It's been amazing. This plan was the product of 35 people's, actually many of you who I see sitting around the virtual table tonight, who came together with their respective areas of expertise to hammer out a plan to update the 2011 Climate Action Plan. And this is basically driving everything we do every single day at Transition Salt Spring. We had a lot of input and expertise, and it was divided up into segments. And you can see them here on the screen. In the past year, we've actually been doing thematic presentations on each of them. And in fact, tonight's event is actually part of the transportation one. We kind of saved that one to last because we knew people would be really keen on it, but we wanted to make sure we gave really good airplay throughout the year to the other sections as well. Governance is not kind of the meaning of governance that's often talked about on Salt Spring. It's like, oh yeah, let's change the way we do things in terms of how we're administered, i.e. municipality or what have you. It's more about the need for cross-cutting across jurisdiction work that we need to be able to address climate change. So, you know, one of the things we did is we took a lot of data sets from existing public data that's out there and really homed in on what are the impacts for our island. So here you see year 2100, which isn't really that far away, the high tide mark during a king tide. King tides are in the fall typically. And this is basically during I don't know, actually, this one isn't during a storm. This is just a king tide. And as you can see, there's a lot of scary numbers there. And we actually translated some of this data into images because they are worth 1,000 words. We all know that things like this are happening increasingly. We experienced last summer heat domes, and in the fall, atmospheric rivers, new words in our vocabulary. And I don't know if you noticed, but if you go down to the basement at Mowat's, look at their carpet next time you're there. It's very watermarked, and they regularly have to do cleanup as it is. So this is a sign of what's happening. And if you want to go get a building permit someday in 2100, bring your hip waders. We did these as a way of driving home what we can be looking at, what we could be looking at in the not too distant future. So there are two things we need to do. We need to both reduce emissions, but we also need to adapt. We need to do that, the mitigation, that's this slide here, but we also need to do adaptation. I will be asking a question of the minister about climate change adaptation as it relates to roads, for example. And you can see of all the categories we have here, look at 2018, and then look at business as usual for 2030. If we do nothing, but if we actually do a lot to follow the targets that are actually national targets and provincial targets, we could really change the picture here. And you'll note here, interestingly, that food is the biggest source of emissions. Now that's indirect emissions, because a lot of that food, in fact, 96% of that food comes from elsewhere. But our biggest source of emissions, hands down, direct emissions, is transportation. And that's what we'll be focusing on tonight. And that's what we all hope we can do in terms of reducing our emissions from transportation and adapting. So here you have in 5 easy bullets, this is what the Climate Action Plan said. It said we got to tackle our air emissions, which if we calculated them all up, would be a substantial number. Air travel is quite something. We have COVID to thank for the reduction in those emissions, and hopefully we can continue to be modest on that score. We also need to expand our active transportation, and there will be an emphasis on that tonight, and I'll explain why in a moment. We very much need to electrify transportation, and we are seeing a lot of provincial and federal attention to that. With announcements in recent days. Expanding public transit as well. We don't all need to be traveling in our own private vehicles all the time. And of course, reducing vehicle emissions from the ICE vehicles. Those are internal combustion engine vehicles that will remain on the roads for quite some time. It would be foolish to actually remove them all at once. That's a really great asset, and we need to wind them down and then convert to something a little better. So within each of these, there are a whole bunch of things. I mean, of course, we had 250 recommendations in the whole plan. So in terms of electrifying transportation, for example, we need to do a lot of tracking of data, and we've got the EV group that's been doing a lot of that with us, for our community, which is fantastic. We need to electrify our BC ferries fleets and seaplanes. We know Harbour Air has got a commitment to do that. And on transit, we need to increase the routes and the ridership and improve the customer experience. I know Gayle loves to talk about getting more bus shelters on the island, and I know that she's really keen on getting one printed on a 3D printer. We also need to make changes to our land use, like concentrating development in areas where there already is development, which helps to reduce our transportation emissions. Active transportation, you're going to hear a lot about the Salish Sea Trail tonight. Close the loop on that last section of the Salish Sea Trail going from Fulford to Vesuvius. Improve walkability, build on the amazing work that's been done already. And as Adam likes to say, we need to increase the safety for pedestrians and cyclists on this island by looking at speed limits, better shoulder maintenance, road sharing. There are many jurisdictions have sharrows on the roads, and those are those arrows, those double arrows that show that the road is for sharing. It's not, maybe not a bike lane exclusively, but it's a way to note to vehicles that we are sharing the road, and we need to be mindful of that. Maybe if we could, I will just end my share. Just a moment here. There we go. Just say that, you know, we can't do all this alone. And tonight we are emphasizing low carbon transportation solutions like active transportation, including biking and transit. But that's not because EVs aren't a huge part of our emissions. As you saw on the chart, they are our largest single source of direct emissions. But we also have to acknowledge that electrification of transportation has become a major provincial and federal strategy. But a couple of months ago, we hosted Let's Go Shopping for an EV, the recording which is available on our website and on our YouTube channel. It was very popular, and the great news was that of the more than 100 people who attended, 9 in 10 didn't have an EV and were planning to buy one. So that's really good and gives me a lot of hope. And if you didn't already know, Salt Spring has the most EVs per capita of any jurisdiction in BC, but the Crown will soon have a lot of competition. So we have a long way to go, my friends. According to Jim Standen, the chair of our very active EV working group, we need to add 80 EVs to our fleet of about 300, 350 to keep on track with our emissions reductions goals for 2030. So let's go shopping for that EV, used or new. We have a huge debt of gratitude to people like Jim Standen and the many members of the EV working group who've worked tirelessly to promote EVs on our little island. Chargers are here because of them. Many of the EVs are here because of them and because of their hard work in the community, like through programs like their Ask an Owner EV program, which helps people understand, so what's it like when you do this, or what's a Nissan Leaf like to drive? And they have a lot of achievements that we can collectively celebrate, like 310,000 avoided liters per year of gasoline that don't have to be trucked here. And in terms of avoided emission, that's more than I calculated this with an EPA calculator, that's more than 75 times around our beautiful Earth in a gas-powered car. It also means the elimination of 600 annual messy oil changes. Something that will be something our successors will not know what it is when we tell them, like dialing a phone. We also do owe a huge debt of gratitude to Island Pathways, who worked tirelessly to accelerate and indeed build active transportation routes on Salt Spring. You'll be hearing from them tonight, of course. And all those pathways in and around Ganges, that's Island Pathways. We have to thank for that. In fact, they built nearly $1 million in community-owned pathways in the Ganges village area, costing taxpayers a mere quarter of that. Their advocacy and hard work has also given us a network of e-bike chargers all around the island, from the golf club, library, the pool, and the most recent one installed at Ruckle Park. We also have 36 bike racks that are installed because of their hard work. So it's going to take all of us to go green with our transportation. Transition Salt Spring is working with all the other groups to make this happen. And we'd like to thank these groups for doing what they do and making our dreams come true around reducing our emissions and preparing us for a carbon constrained future. So that's, in a nutshell, that is the CAP, the Climate Action Plan chapter on transportation and our goals. And now I'd like to turn things over to Donald McLennan, excuse me, from Island Pathways to talk about footpaths. I learned something about Donald's history today, a really esteemed man. He's on the board of Island Pathways and a longtime member of Partners Creating Pathways. Donald is also former chair of the Salt Spring Island Transportation Commission and also a former Canadian ambassador and diplomat. Donald, welcome.
Thank you very much, Brian, and good afternoon, everyone. Let me begin my brief remarks by quoting a former chair of the Salt Spring Economic Development Commission, John Tiley. John said that creating pedestrian-friendly environments is at the core of every truly successful community. And I don't think there are too many out there that would try to make the case that the core of Ganges village as we know it today is pedestrian friendly. But we're witnessing cities and towns all across North America following Europe's well-established example of reducing speed limits in their communities. And while we witness that, the speed limit on our main street in Ganges remains stuck at 50 kilometers an hour with no traffic calming measures in sight. The recent completion of the North Ganges Transportation Plan, initiated by Gary Holman some years ago, was certainly moved the needle in the right direction. And further progress on the Harbor Walk would also advance the concept of making Ganges more pedestrian friendly. But it's really in the periphery of Ganges that light shines the brightest. I'm going to screen share briefly for you a map of the Ganges Village Transportation Network. And who would not delight in sampling the pathways leading into and out of Ganges? Strolling along the pathway past the sculpture garden on Upper Ganges Road, gazing at the vineyard on Lower Ganges Road, meandering through the forest across the bridge at Bogey Creek, jogging with the high school students along the Atkins pathway, and finally walking safely off the road with hundreds of families on their way to the fall fair. This $1 million network, as Bryan just mentioned, cost the Salt Spring taxpayer just $250,000. This network was designed by an Island Pathways volunteer engineer, and Island Pathways contributed $750,000 in other funding and volunteer labor to build the network. A new section was added every year between 2008 and 2017. Before I retired to Salt Spring in 2005, I lived the majority of my life in very large cities, very far from the rural setting that is beautiful Salt Spring. And we are, and I think we need to remind ourselves sometimes that we are a very small community on a small island with a small civil service and a small tax base, which means that affordability looms very large. Salt Spring may be small, but it is rich in one commodity, and that is volunteers. I take my hat off to Gary Holman for his vision in establishing the Transportation Commission and for his vision in launching the North Ganges Transportation Plan and the Ganges Village Pathway Network in partnership with Island Pathways. And I take my hat off to Brenda Guild and to Jean Gelwicks, who built up Island Pathways to its preeminent position amongst volunteer groups with huge community support on Salt Spring. Island Pathways counts volunteer engineers with over 150 years of collective experience to bring to the building of pathways. And Island Pathways has won awards at the local level, the provincial level, and even the national level. We have a proven record of designing pathways that are rural, that are eco-sensitive, and that are affordable. Let me quote the Driftwood editorial of November the 12th, 2014, regarding the voter approval of the transportation referendum at that time. The Transportation Commission and the CRD stand to realize further savings by teaming with Island Pathways, a volunteer-driven group with miles of experience on the pedestrian infrastructure front. That philosophy is every bit as important today as it was in 2014. In conclusion, Island Pathways believes that two things are necessary if active green transportation is to thrive on our fair island. Number one, we need to make headway on getting the speed limit reduced with traffic calming measures on Ganges Main Street through town. Number two, we need a CRD, which is not just tolerant of volunteers, but which is enthusiastic about volunteers. Finally, I hope that Island Pathways will find a way on its, to build on its extraordinary legacy of contributing to quality of life on Salt Spring for many years to come. Thank you very much.
That's great, Donald. Thank you for that. I wonder if we could, in view of the time, hold questions till after Bob's presentation, and we can actually do them both together. Would that be okay, Donald, for you?
Oh, by all means, sure.
Okay, that's great. So next up, we have Bob Mackay. He's a board member and Bicycle Working Group Chair of Island Pathways. He's also a member of the Salish Sea Trail Working Group and the Islands Trust Ganges Village Planning Working Group. Hats off to you, Bob, for that work. Bob is a BC representative on Federal Council and past interim president of the Green Party of Canada. Please welcome, Bob.
Thanks very much, Brian. Appreciate it. And nice to hear from Don as well on all of the other Island Pathways work. You should know that Cycling Salt Spring is part of Island Pathways. So what I'm going to talk about more is cycling, and what I had as a question put forward was, you envision a salt spring that is safe and accessible for cyclists. How do you think we should get there? And my answer to that is basically the active transportation is the answer for not just cyclists, but most of us. Our own Ministry of Transport design guidelines, which came out a few years ago, and has examples galore of benefits for people's health, the economy, and just the simple enjoyment of life that cycling brings, other than those like Brian Smallshaw that just got smoked on Ganges Hill, I understand from the chat. But let me just share my screen here for a sec. I'll show you a few things. There we go. All right, so just in talking about our Ministry of Transport, that hopefully you can all see my screen right now, on active transportation, has a lot about how they're making active transportation better in BC. Here's the one of the British Columbia Active Transportation Design Guide, which is like almost 600 pages long. So there's lots of detail on how to do this. And I'm just going to point out that they've got a section on cycling as well. So it's that's well noted, perhaps is the way to put it. But this bit here is from the BC Cycling Coalition, and it gives you some idea of how many people cycle. Like a couple of million people ride a bicycle at least once a year, 250,000 children walk or cycle to school. It goes on and on. But so cycling is happening, and right now I'm just going to stop sharing screen for half a sec. There we go. And it's simple. To make this work, we just decide to give pedestrians priority, then cyclists, then transit, then cars and trucks. And this is being done successfully and at low cost by traffic engineers all over the world. So it can be done. Simple, but not easy, because we've designed our environment to be car-centric. And there's a huge inertia in changing that. One of the suggestions that I would like to put forward, maybe perhaps a place to start, is with children. There are health, safety, and community connection benefits with children. I'm going to share my screen again just for a sec and show you something else that many of you may have missed. Oh, sorry, I hit the wrong button. Share screen. There we go, share. Yeah, so this is the Gulf Islands driftwood from, I think it was it was this month, March 2nd. Getting to School Without a Car Encouraged. This was written by Robin Jenkinson, and she did a phenomenal job of laying out the health benefits, the environmental benefits, and all of these. And what I'm suggesting here, I think, is that that's a good place to start. And that's where Cycling Salt Spring just raised, having got money from ICBC and from the Lions and others, to actually get kids started at the elementary schools in Salt Spring. I was blown away when I read this article, because when I grew up, most of us walked or biked to school, and about 12% were driven. And but today, it's completely flipped. So it's like 12% that walk or bike, and about half of the kids are driven to school. So that's a phenomenal place to start as far as I'm concerned. The next place, of course, is recognizing that the growth in cycling generally, and particularly the benefits of electric bikes, are for handling our hills. I'm seeing an increase in the age demographic and a subtle shift, just starting to go from cycling for sport to cycling for just simple transportation, going into town, picking up the groceries, that sort of a thing. And there was another article more recently, and this is the Biking Bliss. Simone Onpre wrote it, did a very good job, I'd like to say, and about how beneficial and how much fun it could be just to cycle. So I think that in the final analysis, I know Don, that we are a small island and we don't have a whole lot of money, but I think we're going to have to spend some money. And I just real quickly before this, I had a look. The Mackenzie interchange in Victoria cost $96 million. $96 million. The McTavish Road interchange cost $28 million. The Beacon Avenue and Galaran Road roundabout in Sydney, the one they're just planning, is $5 million. I think maybe we could find some money for active transportation. So this coming May, we'll have lots of cycling Salt Spring activities. So I encourage everyone listening to join Island Pathways, to stay in touch, and cycling Salt Spring, of course, being a part of Island Pathways. So go to the Island Pathways site and scroll down. There's really a lot of good information on here for people. There's a bit I did on walkable Ganges that you can have a look at and become a member. So that's the first question I had. The second question, and I think I'll stop sharing so you can see me for a sec. As a member of the Ganges Village Plan Task Force, how would you like to see active transportation better supported in Ganges? One thing I'd like to mention is I think that that active transportation would be a huge benefit for businesses in Ganges. Not to have the main road go right through the center of the village at speed, I think would be phenomenal. And this is something that we have to get across to many of the businesses. There are many studies that show the slowing traffic and encouraging active transportation, despite the concerns, have actually increased business volumes and profits. And the how is important. It can be done, but it takes more than changing the speed limit and putting up some signs. Other areas that have tried find that the road design and traffic calming work best. And for anybody interested, I'm going to show you a book. We'll share one more time here for you, and I'll be done. New share, sorry. There we go. This book is in the library right now. It's called Curbing Traffic. They brought it in for us, and it's a phenomenal book. It's by a couple of folks that grew up in Vancouver and now live in the Netherlands, about the human case for fewer cars in our lives. And there's another one I'm going to try and get in that I borrowed called Building the Cycling City. Same group, same authors, but just previous. So some good reading for, I know many of you that are listening to this are already sold on the idea that this will give you some arguments. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It's really great hearing both these presentations together. To really get a sense of the work, the hard work that's been going on the island. So deep gratitude to you guys and all of the friends and colleagues you work with to try and make things good for all of us here. Thank you. We are just, we're trying to queue up the minister. There is on our participant list, Rob's iPhone, and I just wanted to know if that is indeed Rob Fleming.
Hi, Brian. I think I'm Modi MO, which is
Modi MO. Awesome.
Acronym. I'm sorry.
Wonderful. No problem. That's great. It's really great to have you here. Aaron Ann, might you be able to spotlight Modi, aka Minister Rob Fleming? Wonderful. There you are. Great. Thank you so much for being here tonight, Rob. I just want to properly introduce you to the folks we have here today who are from Salt Spring and the Gulf Islands. So as most everybody knows, Rob Fleming is the BC Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure. He previously served as the Minister of Education in the Horgan government. Before his election to the legislature, Rob has served 2 years as Victoria City Councillor. There, he chaired the city's Finance Committee and represented Victoria at the CRD, the Victoria Regional Transit Commission, the Capital Region Housing Corporation, and Tourism Victoria. As a city councillor, Rob was a leading advocate for public transit and affordable housing. He was instrumental in the creation of the Capital Region's Affordable Housing Trust and the region's transportation plan. Minister, it's really great to have you with us here tonight. And thanks for making the time. Sorry, we're a bit late. We're already behind. People are really keen on this topic. So I hope we can stay until the top of the hour. Is that good with you?
That sounds great.
Okay, excellent. So I'm just going to jump right in the interest of time, and know that we will have some time for some questions from the folks in the audience as well, and they will be in the chat. So folks, we will do our best to get to your questions at the end of our conversation. So my first question for you, Minister, last year's floods delivered unprecedented damage to roads all over BC, including here on Salt Spring, where roads were washed out and required and still require a lot of repair. At Transition, we also know from recent experience in our forest restoration work that how and where roads are built and maintained have huge impacts on how well they respond to weather events like the ones we are increasingly experiencing. So I have a couple of nested questions. First, what is BC's strategy to ensure that our roads are both built and managed to adapt to our dangerous new realities? And second, what can we do to ensure that roads are built, sited, and managed in ways that work with natural processes rather than at odds with them, and managed in ways with materials, for example, that actually are integrated better into the ecosystems around them. I'm thinking, for example, of the work that's being done in the European Union around standards for the codification of roads in terms of the strata they're using for material composition, or adaptive road design strategies, which include things like the increased use of roadside vegetation and holding ponds. So in short, after all that, where do we need to go on this front, and what do we need to do to get there?
Yeah, thank you very much, Brian, and thank you to everyone who's taking time out of their lives tonight and for the invitation that I've received. This is I'm speaking to you from the Songhees and Esquimalt First Nations, the traditional territory of the Algonquin people, otherwise known as my legislative office in the current location where I'm sitting, and. This is a great question to start with, because obviously we have destroyed highways extensively and local roads throughout British Columbia. Highway 1, even on the Malahat, was part of the atmospheric river. And in fact, we're just going out to the market right now for RFP on extensive repairs, which will incorporate some of the design features that Brian has mentioned, and some very strong engineering treatments around slope stabilizations. But in many parts of the province where we lost connectivity through our highways, extensive damage on Highway 1 Fraser Canyon, Highway 8 Fraser Canyon, these are the sites of extensive wildfires over the last many summers. So upslope conditions, revegetation, and a number of interventions that we need to make, some of them which would be engineered, like debris dams and things like that, are going to be part of our Build Back Better plan. But some of the core principles of the climate resilience that are now part of the engineering standard and requirements in the ministry for any major project, highway improvement or a new road, although we don't punch too many new corridors through the province at this point, require that we no longer look back at just once in a century floodplain information or data that we have about precipitation and weather conditions. We look ahead at a predictive modeling, and we're working with We're working with the federal government, the Environment Forecast Center, and other organizations on how to do that. So this is work we probably started about 10 years ago. We had a substantive update on our guidelines in 2019. Other provinces are looking to us. So Newfoundland had flooding not too long after us that damaged some of their highways. So they're looking at some of the engineering principles that we've designed. But on the Coquihalla, for example, where we had culverts, we're not going to replace those culverts. We need superior drainage systems. We're going to have bridge structures perhaps on that highway. I should back up and say, would we have put that a 1985 highway through a river canyon like the Coquihalla? No, but at $100 million a kilometer for a new highway, and that's a 130-kilometer stretch, I don't think we're going to take $13 billion and take it away from active transportation and the Broadway SkyTrain project that I'm going to go see tomorrow, where they're tunnel boring, and all the kinds of zero carbon transportation innovation that we're trying to promote. We're going to repair that highway to a new climate resilient standard. That's kind of the approach. There's a number of strategies within it and some really innovative things that you mentioned, Brian, around holding ponds and other things. What we need is the federal government to agree with us with their disaster financial assistance program that there is such a thing as Build Back Better, that you can't just build back exactly what you had. And they're sympathetic to that, but they have to make some policy and fiscal adjustments. And so far, they've been quite agreeable to that. It's going to be a busy year coming up, so we're going to see whether we can walk in the same direction and get at those kinds of new principles and new types of thinking.
Yeah, there's so much there. And I'd love to even stay on this question, because when you're talking about forest fires, and of course the coincidence between forest management, forest fire, and the atmospheric river and the landslides, there's so much there to talk about. But let's move on to question number 2. Thank you for that. There's a lot there, and I'm really happy to hear. And it's actually activating a lot of folks with questions in the audience. So I think what you're saying is really resonating. So our second question, in 2020, the BC government released the South Island Transportation Strategy, which, as it turns out, as I know you've been reminded, did not include the Gulf Islands. The strategy's emphasis on increasing connections between different modes of transportation, active transportation, public transit, are particularly important in making it easier for folks to go low carbon and active in their transportation choices, as well as increasing transportation equity, a key theme, and climate justice from our point of view. Our islands, however, are facing real challenges, as I know you know from your work with folks here in these same areas, and we really are lacking an overall strategy to address them. One gap, quite literally, and Darlene, if you could show the slide so just to give the audience and the minister a visual of what I'm going to talk about here, is the completion of the Salish Sea Trail. This really is, Minister, a diamond in the rough. If it were completed, it would create 156 kilometers of a safe bike route that would go from Victoria to basically through your neck of the woods and Victoria's Swan Lake on the Lochside Trail up to Swartz, over to Salt Spring, across to Crofton, then back down to Victoria on the Cowichan Valley Trail on the Galloping Goose. Maybe if you could end that share, Darlene. But the only thing standing in the way is that proportionally teeny tiny little 20-kilometer gap between Fulford and Ganges Village. But as it stands, we only have a one-way, 136-kilometer safe cycling route that dead ends at 2 ferry terminals. So now our Transportation Commission Chair, Gayle Baker, COD Director Gary Holman, Adam Olsen, and with advocacy from island groups like Salt Spring Solutions, have long been highlighting the dangerous conditions on the remaining 20-kilometer stretch of road there, and have been working with your office and with you, in fact, and with MOTI to find ways to overcome safety issues and basically a lack of safe cycling infrastructure. But even as the road stands now, there's an absence of shoulders, dangerous narrow stretches and curves, poor road conditions, and I know you'll probably talk about this, a crazy quilt of rights of way that have made planning for the completion of this trail challenging, for sure. But I think the fundamental problem for us on this island is that neither the CRD nor the Islands Trust has jurisdiction over these roads. They're MOTI's roads. So now MOTI has certainly been at the table and has been very helpful, but we feel that without strategic direction from the minister, we're concerned that the opportunity to complete this diamond in the rough, the Salish Sea Trail, will only remain a dream. So long-winded way of saying, Minister, what could Moti do to accelerate planning to close this loop on the Salish Sea Trail, leading to the completion of, I think, a piece of infrastructure that would be hailed all across the province as an example of fine active transportation infrastructure?
Yeah, and undoubtedly maybe even a site of international cycling sports competitions or something like that.
Love it.
That does sound very cool. The South Island Transportation Strategy, I don't want to use this as a cop-out, but it was developed before I became the minister. And so I can't explain the jurisdictional reasons why there was an exclusion there. But as I explained to MLA Olsen, and I think I was meeting with Gary Holman as well, that doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing, because quite frankly, there's a bunch of priorities, some of which have funding attached to them and some of which do not, in the South Island Transportation Study. And we want perhaps Salt Spring and other Gulf Islands to really have their own program. And we're just getting going on more ambition on active transportation projects. So the budget we just tabled is a significant improvement. It's about 2.5 times increase annually on active transportation investments. So it went from about 8 million a year, which was very modest and heavily oversubscribed. We've got a budget on the floor of the House right now that would be 60 million over the next 3 years, and that will certainly help address the backlog of projects. However, there is a cap. Like, the funding is not high. It's typically 500,000 a project. So if you went into several phases, you could get $1.5 or $2 million perhaps. And we've used that program to fund some multi-use pathways on Salt Spring Island, which is good. There's a track record and there's knowledge about how to apply successfully for that grant. What's really exciting right now is that the federal government has actually followed through on their commitment in the last election to create a federally funded active transportation fund. And it has bigger dollars for bigger, more ambitious projects. And we're pleasantly surprised to see that. And we want to be able to match that. So we're just watching. I think the closing date was actually today for a number of projects in that new federal fund. And we're gonna work with that. Now, when we have highway projects or bridge replacements or tunnels, we don't count the significant active transportation component of those, like say on the Patella Bridge or the Massey Tunnel when it's built, which will have a separate 5-meter wide active transportation tube. We don't count that as active transportation funding, but it is in the hundreds of millions of dollars, which is good, because some of those crossings have nothing right now for pedestrians or cyclists. Now, back specifically to this 20 kilometers, I've just sort of been diving into this file, and I understand that the complexity of the rights of way and who owns what, and private property owners, and making an assembly of land for the kind of shoulder widening project that would probably be required here is really in the investigation stage. I think it's got a lot of merit. Adam Olsen, I don't know if he's on the call, but he just wrote me a letter, which I haven't had time to respond to yet, asking whether there might be some tax treatment for landowners to essentially grant that land to an authority or perhaps to our ministry. So we're going to look at all that because it does. What was the title of the slide? There is a gap in the teeth, or a gap in the network that merits exploration.
Yeah, for sure. I thank you for that, Rob. Really appreciate it. And I think you do know you have an island that's really willing. It shows up in the numbers. We've got a lot of people proportionally on Salt Spring who are participating in our webinar tonight, and they're really keen and active. And the tax treatment thing, the benefit for rights of way is really key. So know that you've got a bunch of NGOs on this island who are here to help prepare the ground. So if there's work that we can do collaboratively with Modi to pave the way, so to speak, for that trail, we are willing to do that by making people aware of the benefits, if there are tax benefits.
Well, maybe what we should do is, as a starting point, is do a definitive road survey and just have a extensive look at that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. We're this is going really quickly tonight. We started later, and I have one more question, but we also have a lot of folks on the line who have questions as well. So I'd like to actually turn to Darlene to pick out a question maybe from our Darlene or Patty that they want to speak into the phone to give folks on who are listening an opportunity to be heard tonight. We have a lot of great activists on the island who are here with us. Darlene or Patty, are either of you ready to?
Yes, good evening, Minister Fleming. Thank you so kindly. I will have first question from the audience is Brenda Gayle. Her question is specific to Salt Spring Island. The question is, will the minister honor Minister Trevina's promise to widen and repave from the top of Ganges Hill to the top of Fulford Hill soon after the Ganges Hill upgrade is done?
Okay, well, so I'm going to have to look specifically in our transportation investment plan, but I know there is a repaving schedule that is coming good very shortly. So I apologize that I can't provide a timeline or anything like that this evening, but I will take that away and report back through Bryan, I presume, to the participants in the meeting.
Mm-hmm. Yes, we have a host of questions for you. So thank you very much for offering to respond to questions that we were unable to ask this evening. Darlene, would you like to present a question?
Sure, thanks, Patty. We have one from Brian Smallshaw, wondering how much did it cost the government to give everyone an ICBC free tank of gas? And during that consideration of that rebate, was consideration given to spending those funds on improving public transit, bike lanes, EV infrastructure, et cetera?
Yeah, thank you. So, so that rebate, which is through the Insurance Corporation of BC and 3.2 million policyholders, I think, in the province, which is quite a big chunk of the population, over 18 especially, was because ICBC is in a position to be able to provide consumer relief to ratepayers. It can be used, of course, and spent on anything. It is also applicable to people who own and operate electric vehicles as well. There may be additional ways that we can, depending on what inflation looks like over the next few fiscal quarters. We're hoping this is, of course, temporary, and some of it's related to energy prices and Russia's invasion of the Ukraine and supply chain pinches and things like that that may resolve themselves. It's something that we're going to have to monitor. But I would basically respond to the question by saying, and I mentioned it earlier, we've 2.5-fold increase on active transportation investment. We've never had a larger investment in SkyTrain, for example, if you want to talk about improving the public transit network in Metro Vancouver in the TransLink jurisdiction. I think we're going to add 27% through the Surrey Langley SkyTrain and the Broadway to Arbutus corridor, 27% to the existing track network of SkyTrain in that region, which is fantastic. We will literally get hundreds of thousands of people out of their cars. And then the BC Transit system, which serves so many communities, including Salt Spring Island, has an 11% budget increase this year, which we'll hope to build on even further. I think in our regional area, there's up to 20,000 expanded service hours. So that sets us up kind of nicely, because we're one of the only provinces that didn't cut public transit service during the pandemic when ridership and people staying at home collapsed, and we're really proud of that, because our transit system is in really good shape. We've fiscally backstopped it, and I think we spent, between the 3 public transit agencies, and I'm including BC Ferries in this, and TransLink and BC Transit, we spent $1 billion in the first tranche of support, and we were very active, Premier Horgan in particular, in getting the feds to extend it this year, because the pandemic isn't over in terms of transit ridership recovery. So I think the Trudeau government announced an additional $750 million, and we'll take our 15% per capita of that, and we're applying it to public transit.
That's really great. We have one more question from Patty, and then we'll begin to wind down the session. Patty, go ahead.
So Minister Fleming, this question is from Steve Earle, and it refers to the 1992 MOU between the Ministry of Transportation and the Islands Trust to ensure that the control over the island roads, the Gulf Island roads, are firmly under the control of the ministry and that all main roads are treated as highways. We need to change that so to allow for islanders some more control over their roads so that they can reduce speed limits, make traffic lanes narrower, which will also slow cars down, and make more room for pedestrians and cyclists. This is something that the minister could do, and it won't cost millions of dollars. What are your thoughts?
Yes, well, if it's an area where I have authority to reduce the speed limit, we have done that for sure. We have highway networks that go through town centers in every region of the province. I don't think Salt Spring Islanders would necessarily want to argue for us to divest our roads, because that might be not a good deal for you as ratepayers. But so, you know, what I typically get from your elected representatives is, you know, the road maintenance services. You want good road maintenance. I know there's been like a lot of potholes because we've had this extremely wet winter, and it gets under the roadbed and freezes and cracks and all that. So we want to make sure that those things are getting fixed. We want to make sure that they're maintained properly. So I've had some really good meetings with folks on all of the Gulf Islands actually about some of the problems they're experiencing locally. And we like to work with the contractor to keep roads in good condition. And there's some outstanding things that we need to get at for sure. But in terms of road safety, there's a number of improvements that we're looking at on the Gulf Islands as well. And so we need to continue investment. I saw a couple of things coming over on the chat about the transit conditions and not having proper bus shelters and things like that. We have some programs through BC Transit to renew and provide modern bus shelter facilities. And in my mandate, for sure, we can coordinate better transit exchanges from the ferry system to the public transit system. So those are all things that, you know, for the sake of time tonight, I'll make a commitment to come back and work with your organization on seeing what kinds of improvements we can schedule.
That'd be really great. And in fact, we were talking with Adam last week, and he offered to do a deep dive session on transportation issues. And if you'd be willing, it would be, I know that people would love to hear from you. You know, as we're homing in on 7 o'clock, getting you to bed on time, Minister. But, you know, the question we're asking our panelists at the end of the evening tonight is, if you have a drone flying over Salt Spring and Pender and Saturna in 2050, and which is when our climate action plan ends, what do you see from there in terms of green transportation infrastructure in this region? What's your personal vision? And while we are recording this webinar, we will not hold you to these promises. This is our vision, capital V.
Well, I would hope that we ought to have 100% electric vehicles powered by nothing but renewable energy. I think we're speaking, end of March 2022, at a time when, like, in my constituency alone, in the last year, I think 4 new EV bike shops have opened up, and at a time when not a lot of new small businesses were starting up. So we're starting to see some transformational things that are really, really interesting happening. Gary Holman, I can't praise him enough for, I was a regional district director on the CRD with him when he worked long and hard to get public transit introduced on Salt Spring Island. Perhaps we'd have depending on the population, a more robust community bus system on the other islands, if not a public transit formalized system. 100% electric operated ferries, low carbon building technologies on those islands that would be started by Clean BC, but then just become the only, market OEM products that you buy for building, all of those things. Perhaps even some renewable energy production that is using technologies that would be generating electricity on the islands themselves. So I think there's a lot of cool things that we could do. And I know, based on the will and the appetite of folks that live on that island to tackle climate change today, that would probably be a bit of a demonstration project for hopefully by, say, 2030 for other regions of the province to emulate.
Well, we're keen. I love your vision. I know it resonates with people here for sure. And one thing got to close that loop as well. I mean, making sure we have, you know, a full array of active transportation options. Actually, in the Climate Action Plan vision at the beginning, I should send it to you. It's basically got that in it, along with us waving goodbye to the last sewage truck going off the with our sewage to Langford or Souk, I think it is. So, Minister, I want to thank you so much for being here tonight. I know on behalf of everyone here, we really appreciated you staying behind to speak with us tonight, to get down in, you know, the local trenches, to talk about and hear about local issues. So hats off to you for doing that, and thank you. And we hope to talk with you soon in the future about salient issues on the island and about having an ongoing relationship with your team. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for the invitation, Brian. It's a pleasure to join all of you. I hope to see you in person now that we're getting to those kinds of activities at Saturday Market sometime soon on Salt Spring. I'm usually there 1 or 2 times a year. I enjoy that very much. And there were a number of really good written questions that you submitted to me in advance, and I see even more tonight. So we'll try and get some answers to that. But I have lots of information from the Ministry of the Environment about electric vehicle battery end-of-life producer responsibility and some of the things that we're doing this year and through to 2026 about environmental stewardship. So get you all that information, because clearly it's a highly engaged audience, and I think they'd be interested in that and some of the questions that arose tonight. So thank you very much, and have a wonderful evening, everybody.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm sorry we didn't get to that question. It's a really good one. And I did my research. There is lots of good stuff happening. So thank you.
Great. Have a good night.
Have a good night.
Cheers.
Take care.
Bye now.
Well, folks, I think we should do that again. I think it's really good to be hearing from our elected leaders, obviously near, but also far as well. Darlene or Patty, can you remind me where we're headed next?
We are going to introduce lovely Gayle Baker.
Oh, that's an easy one. So we're pivoting tonight. Thank you for all of your attention, all 68, 70 of you here tonight. I'd like to introduce Gayle Baker, our former director of Salt Spring in our rebooted manifestation, and chair of the CRD Transportation Commission. Also, I mean, it's fair to say Gayle left the Board of Transition so she can pursue some ambition she has around local governance. So hats off to you for your love and your dedication to this community, Gayle. Over to you, and then over to Adam as well. Thank you. Welcome, Gayle.
My job is to introduce Adam, and I have no job.
Oh, Gayle, you're just muted.
I guess I got on.
You're back. You're back.
Right. Wait. Anyway, I'm not sure what you heard, but my job is to introduce our MLA, Adam Olsen, and I have no job because everyone knows Adam. And so I don't want to spend a lot of time telling you all the things you know, but I know you know something that I've learned, and that's that he has wisdom. It's amazing all the things he knows. Deep caring about such a wide range of things, from our Indigenous to healthcare to, you can ask him anything, but tonight it's transportation only, and also the vision he has. And so he's going to start out with this vision because he is creative and he thinks out of the box in a way that I just love. So I will be quiet and welcome you, Adam. Thank you.
Thank you. And I really appreciate the opportunity. Thank you, Gayle. It's nice to see you this evening. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow. And a little plug for Ask Salt Spring. I'll be back on island tomorrow at 11 a.m. I think it's at the library tomorrow. I usually get taken where I need to go. So tomorrow at the library, I think, is where we'll be at 11 a.m. for Ask Salt Spring. And it's been a couple of months, actually. And this isn't to brag or anything, but I think I had a pretty near perfect record up until recently. I've been doing a lot of committee work recently, so I had to cancel, and I apologize for that. You know, I think listening to and following the minister, Gayle, was really good opportunity to hear Rob and Mr. Fleming talk about his new file. He's not so new; he's been in the job now for about a year. But I'm, every time that I talk to Minister Fleming about the variety of issues, and there's always a variety of transportation-related issues on the Southern Gulf Islands. I'm encouraged because he's very well briefed and very knowledgeable. There's a lot of roads. I don't know how many kilometers of roads there are in the province that are owned by the province, but he has a huge portfolio of asphalt and not asphalt, depending on the surface treatment. And you can talk to him about these issues, and he seems to be very much up to speed. So it's encouraging when you have these issues to be able to take them to government and know that the minister is attentive to the issues of communities, and as well, I think has ideas of their own and visions of their own about how they'd like to get us to where we need to be. So I'm not sure where we want to start here, Gayle. Maybe at the very beginning. I got elected in 2017, and at that same time, there was an incorporation discussion going on Salt Spring, and a vote that was to follow shortly after that. And to a great extent, I think roads and the cost of roads were a key feature of that discussion. And that was only on one of the islands that I'm a steward of, a political steward of. But all the Southern Gulf Islands communities and islands have tremendous needs when it comes to transportation. The atmospheric river really did, as Rob pointed out, across the province, and I think as everybody knows, the roads on Southern Gulf Islands are particularly fragile. And I was over on Saturna this past weekend and saw some of the fragility of the roads there, and began my advocacy even before leaving the island. And I can do that on any Gulf Island that I visit. I don't get too far on Pender without talking about the Canal Road, for an example. So, I think that there's a good understanding of the challenges that the islands face. And one of the focuses that after the 2020 election, after the 3 and a bit year education that I had, in 2017, I kind of knew. And at the 2020 election, I was, fully, I think, emerged in the conversations around transportation. You pointed to the fact that there's any number of issues that are constantly in front of us in trying to manage and trying to find solutions for. Transportation consistently is in the top 1 or 2 in any one of those. I think probably with healthcare that they tend to be the highest, I don't say highest priority, but certainly take the most amount of time and the most amount of effort. And it was at that time in 2020 that Gayle and I and a number of other people, Elizabeth Fitzgerald and others, talked about focusing on the Salish Sea Trail and creating a working group and really getting to the bottom of and understanding what it is that needs to be done in order to prepare that route for the ultimate treatment, which would be a separated cycling and pedestrian or separated active transportation infrastructure, as it is the highest transited road on the Southern Gulf Islands by far. And there's a whole litany of challenges that face it. It's easy to say we're going to build the trail. It's more difficult once you start to peel back the layers to understand, okay, how is it that we get to it? It's very encouraging to hear Minister Fleming talking about doing a survey of the route, because that's something that has taken up a lot of time in the conversations that we've been having. And it is certainly something that I'll be asking Laura to put on my notes for something to raise in a letter to the minister to say, let's get that done. We know we may be further down this road and the minister is, because we've had Mike Pearson, who's also very attentive and a very good contact within the Southern Vancouver Islands office, and he has brought us information about what parts of the road already have surveys and what parts of the road need surveys and which parts of the road would be good to have LiDAR surveys done. And so we know that there's an expense to it, and which parts we should do and which parts need to be done and which parts already have that information. And we started to collect that data from the minister, or from the ministry. So it's very encouraging to hear Minister Fleming refer to that in this meeting. It's definitely an item that is now on the list to follow up with and say, let's make that happen. Let's do that. You offered it without me having to prompt it. So that's anyway. So that's a bit of advocacy that we'll do. But there is no doubt that the two pieces for me, which are I think, which I've noted on all of the islands, is that people just drive around the islands like they're in urban centers, and the pace of traffic is very quick, and that is not only dangerous for pedestrians, dangerous for cyclists, dangerous for vehicle operators. It's bad for roads, and the higher the pace of the road, or the speed of the traffic, I think it's the pace of the traffic, the more deterioration there is on those roads and those road surfaces. And the reality of many of the roads, or maybe all of the roads on the Southern Gulf Islands, is that they were never constructed to standards that were with a design to last a long time. In some cases, they were built on top of a wagon trail. And one of the challenges, so there are numbers of challenges to upgrading these roads. One of them is that the province doesn't own the right of way, and that becomes very, very expensive when we're engaging with the public and people who own the right of way. And then the second piece of it is that when the ministry goes to open that piece of road up, peel back the layer of asphalt and repair it, you then have to go down much further than you would, say, on West Saanich or on Pat Bay Highway or on a piece of road that the ministry owns, to build the road base that is now the standard that roads are built to. And so if you don't do that, if you don't open it up, then you can leave it. But if you do open it up, you can't not do it, if you know what I mean. From a liability perspective, you have to construct the new piece of road to a standard. And if you think about that over a 20-kilometer stretch, where the cost of everything to do it on the island is more expensive, then that adds to the cost, and that adds to the obstruction, or the obstacle that it becomes. It's easy to put it this way: when the local office is trying to figure out how to spend $6 million or whatever their budget is, they try to pick the lowest hanging fruit first. And if they're doing that year over year, your problem is getting worse, and they're solving, the problems that they're solving are for the same budget. So part of the idea of the Salish Sea Trail Working Group was to bring like-minded people together, groups together that have been working on this for a lot longer than I have, that have a lot more interest. One of the first conversations I think that I had was with Brenda and Jean about this. When I was first running, they basically said, you need to sit down and let us explain to you what you're advocating for if you get elected to represent this island. And I remember those conversations very clearly. And thank you, Brenda, for sharing the experience that you've had doing this important work. So, and others. I shouldn't just stop there. There's many others. So pace of traffic, finding unique ways to overcome the road right-of-way challenge. It's not just Salt Spring, it's Pender. There's triangular chunks of road that go over triangular pieces of land that are owned by the public and or by a private landowner, and then there's a public road that goes over top of it. We can have all of the rest of the land assembled to build a trail, and the whole project stops because a landowner decides they want to leverage the opportunity, I would say, that a government is looking to purchase it. So one of the ideas that we brought to the minister, and Rob mentioned it, is the minister can give tax receipts for gifts. And so his ministry actually, MA Veronica, she responded immediately when we asked about this, gave us a bunch of information. We've got a few more questions and a meeting that will be scheduled in the next little bit to talk to the technical person within the ministry, because I happen to think that I believe that the volunteers that was raised earlier by Donald, the volunteer power on the island will probably have a better chance of convincing neighbors and friends and build momentum around a gift, and not a gift for free, a gift that will be benefited with a donation. What we need to do is understand how it is that and we need to work with the Islands Trust, frankly, because they need to subdivide that chunk of land off of the property so that then it's no longer part of the property. There needs to be evaluation and assessment done on that land so that the ministry knows what it is. So there's some pieces that need to be assembled in this, and the idea would be to put those pieces together into a nice package and then start to talk to people, start to go along the route and say, hey, are you willing to have a conversation about this? Who's willing to have a conversation and who isn't? Because those that are not, then maybe we're having a different conversation about purchasing that land. But those that are, we can generate some momentum, and you can almost see the thermometer. We have X number of kilometers to secure, and we are this far along the way. And so that for me is really important. But I'm going to come back to something that I started at, and then we'll have a conversation today, I think, or I'll do some questions, however it is that you want to go forward on this. I'll come back to the start. I really think that part of what we need to do is also focus on all the rest of the roads, because even the Salish Sea Trail working group successfully to build active transportation on Fulford Ganges from Fulford to Vesuvius, that doesn't make cycling or pedestrian traffic any safer on any of the other roads, on the island or on any of the other islands. And so it becomes a cultural work that we have to do. We have to change the culture of how quickly people move on the island. Signage, inviting people to slow down, inviting people to embrace being in a rural community. And it's not, I point no fingers at anybody other than myself and then everyone else. Because I'm as bad as anybody else. I come on the island and drive like I'm on Pat Bay Highway. And and when I get off the ferry and I'm with that ferry traffic, we're driving like we are in the city. And then when you're an islander, and I maybe say this it might be hazardous to my own health to say this out loud, but when you're an islander, you know the roads so well. It's your community. You drive like you at a higher pace because you know the roads. You've been there, and hey, it's my community. I know that this blind happens here. So there's that as well. So I think that for me, it's we should be working together as well on a cultural shift. Really encouraging people to slow down, enjoy the rural communities that they're a part of, sharing the road. The Sharrows are a perfect solution for this. I really believe that we will be able to move the Fulford Ganges, Fulford Vesuvius piece forward with a whole lot of work, but there's a whole lot of effort as well that needs to be put into making the rest of the island, and I'll say islands, pedestrian and cycling safe, because we're not going to be I'm pretty confident saying there is no need to be putting cycling bike lanes on other roads. What we do need to be doing is we need to be using the road right of way that is already there for multimodal transportation. So if you're walking on that road, you are as valued and as valuable as the person who's driving. And that's really shifting the North American car culture, which we all embrace to one extent or another, some more than others. So I'll leave it at that, and I'm happy to answer any questions, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Thank you. That's what I expect, finding a way to do something differently than we've done it in the past. We're already working with the Arts Council to try to get artist created signs to say, deer crossing everywhere, slow down, you know, things that people will look for. And we're working on that. We're working on traffic calming. We want speed limits slower everywhere on Salt Springs. So thank you for that. Thank you for your support. But I know there are lots of people that want to ask questions, so I will be quiet.
And Gayle, just to mention, and Adam, more to you, we're having a hard time hearing you, Adam. It's cutting in and out a little bit, but the closer you get to your computer and the less you bang the desk, which I know is hard for you to do, the more we can hear you. But please, you know, continue to bang the desk in your mind.
No, I don't need to bang the desk at all. That's the worst part of this place, frankly, is the desk banging part.
Well, we know you do it with passion and with love. So just to let you know, when you're closer to the computer, it helps.
So I'm trying to turn the volume up on my mic. If I had known that Rob was also going to do this from here, maybe I would have gone down to his office, but anyway.
Right.
Very good. Adam, thank you very much. And I really appreciate that you're touching on that. One of the key solutions is the cultural issue that we have on the islands and all of the islands, basically. So signage, education, that we're a rural community that values cyclists and pedestrians. And it's our responsibility, it's everyone's responsibility to be a part of the solution for a bright future on the island. So really appreciate that input. But could you be more specific about one of the questions that's come through is that private land along roadsides, which you touched on, but the province does put into place a way for people to donate their land so they can pave all the way from basically Fulford to Vesuvius or on any of the other Gulf Islands. For example, someone had asked something about Hornby Island, how they managed to achieve lanes with private land. Could you touch a little bit about that? And what is the program that the province actually has in place so that we as a community can encourage landowners to support the culture that we all seemingly strive to achieve here on the island?
Well, so depending on the type of road, the classification of the road, it requires a certain road right-of-way. And in most cases on the Southern Gulf Islands, I'm learning, it's kind of hazardous to say this because it's different everywhere. And in fact, the road right-of-way on most of the rights-of-ways on most of the roads are not like, it's not 66 feet wide everywhere. 66 feet wide here, it's 40 feet there, it's 30 feet over there, and it fluctuates. And basically, the ministry in the past didn't assemble the land and then build the road. They built the road and then just kind of left the land. And we all know that there's an example on Salt Spring in which the road goes over entirely private land, and it's a provincial road that the province owns on land that the landowner owns. And so that makes it very confusing and it makes it very challenging. And so the provincial government can provide charitable tax receipts for people who make donations to the province. And we've asked the ministry if we could access that. And they've basically said, yes, we need certain conditions to be met in order for that to be accomplished. We need to understand how much the value of the land is that's being donated. The land must be separate from the rest of the land, so it needs to be subdivided from the parcel that it is coming from. I think that's the right way of saying it. I think I've explained that. Mm-hmm. So there are a couple of steps to making that happen. We need to understand who those people are. We need to have a conversation with them. How much land needs to be subdivided. We need to have a good relationship with our island's trustees to make a case that this is not a subdivision to build a house, it's a subdivision to add to the road right of way. And then the provincial government would be able to accept that as a donation, and they would be able to return that donation a tax receipt. I don't even know exactly how the separated walking and cycling trail on Hornby Island came to exist, but it does, and it's a beautiful thing. If you drove on Hornby Island and you didn't know to look for it, you wouldn't know that it was there, because it's actually maybe about 15 feet or 20 feet off the road in the forest most. And it's a nice wide trail, and you can cycle on it and you can walk on it. And my understanding was that it was assembled and it's over private land, and that there's some insurance and liability coverage for those owners. And that's primarily the challenge that landowners will have with just saying, yeah, sure, build the trail over my land. Someone falls off their bike or gets hit by a bike on that trail, then they are going to be carrying liability for it. And so one of the things that I think that our working group should be exploring as well is those insurance options, that maybe that might be a solution. Although I think the more elegant option, until we exhaust it, find out that it won't work for us, is to try to find a way that the province can then own that land, that road right of way, so that then they can, because they own the road, then they can make decisions on it free from having to engage the landowner every time. We really found that and I think that, you know, in my conversations with Gary, and Gary's worked very hard on the Ganges Hill project, and it is not to what my expectation of that project is, and I think I can safely say that it's not been to the expectation of Gary's, and largely is because the province has a certain amount of money that's been dedicated to that project. And in fact, a majority of it would be taken up just in the purchase of land. So that, you know, that has significantly limited what the province has been willing, or not willing, what they're able to do with the budget that they've been granted. And so this was when it really, when I really, and we really turned our minds to, can we find a way to assemble that land that takes the cost out of the equation of each project? And so that's when we started to ask the question, and I think it was Gary that said, well, the CRB can give a tax receipt, and I think municipalities can as well, for these gifts, but it would make no sense for them, or it would make less sense to donate it to the CRD than it would be to donate it to the province, who owns the road.
Right. Well, thank you, Adam. This is great. And there are lots and lots of other questions, but we're not going to be able to get to them now. But I want to remind all of you, Adam has promised to do a deep dive on creative visioning ways that we can stop doing what we've done in the past that hasn't worked and start doing some things that are working. So be sure to put in the chat if you'd like to be invited to that. I think it's going to be a really fun thing to do. And we're going to move on to BC Transit, but
can I say one thing? Yeah?
Of course.
Most of these conversations exist around what's not, what we don't have, or what we would like there to be, or what we hope for. And I think that one of the things that I've learned in this business is to embrace what we have. And now that's a challenging thing to say out loud, because people will be like, oh, that's very, you know, it's easy for him to say. However, I think, how can we work within the road right of way that we have? That's going to be the lowest cost option, and it's going to be the easiest thing for us to do in the immediate. We can dream, and we should have goals to have separated, safe cycling, pedestrian, and active transportation, and that is the goal that we're working towards. But in the meantime, how do we work within what we've got right now to come up with unique and elegant solutions that are truly island? And that's what I love about this organization, about this meeting tonight, because those are the ones that we can do in the short term, while we're working on the big long-term projects that are costly and that require a lot of effort. So I want you to know that I'm trying to find solutions to both of those as we move along here.
You wouldn't actually believe the number of comments tonight, Adam. People saying, could we just sweep the sides of the roads? and how much of a difference that would make for cyclists to feel safe on our roads. Like simple, what are seemingly simple solutions that are within the bounds of what we already have. If we could just continuously sweep the sides of the road so that cyclists feel that they're not going to skid out on a gravel pit track there.
Yes. And MCOM.
I don't know the street sweeper, or else I'd be over there cruising around very slowly.
But I will tell you that MCOM is required to sweep only once per year. They are working with us to sweep multiple times. They have a sweeper with the tank. They have made great investment to try to do what we need. It's not happened yet. We're working on it. Anyway, thank you, Adam. You're wonderful. I'll see you tomorrow. 11 o'clock library program room. But now we're going to welcome Tristan Ford. Tristan, it's lovely to see you again. Are you there?
I am. Can you hear me all right?
Oh, we can hear you loud and clear. And Tristan works for BC Transit. He's a transportation planner and an engineering and training. So he's going to have this wonderful combination of both the engineering and the planning. But right now he is just so good at helping Salt Spring figure out how we're going to do better with our BC Transit and our electrification. So I'll be quiet and let you take it. Thanks for being here, Tristan.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah, so first I'll start off with the Salt Spring Island Transit Future Plan, which we completed late last year, I think in October. And overall, the message is Salt Spring Island, the transit network is strong, and it's seen consistent growth from its inauguration in 2014. The main ridership drivers are routes connecting the ferry terminals in Ganges Village. For example, the Route 2 between Fulford Harbour and Ganges carries roughly 60% of all passengers in the system. Commuting and local needs also remain a significant ridership generator, and ridership is typically highest in the spring and summer on the weekends. So this suggests that transit is a key mode of transportation for leisure trips, which is really good. And another encouraging stat is that between April and August, between 2020 and 2021, ridership grew by an average of 45%. So that indicates that post-COVID, ridership is recovering well. We also launched the free transit for children 12 and under, which aligns with BC Transit's commitment to improve transit experience, reduce congestion, and create lifelong transit users. Our engagement process on this report garnered over 290 responses, most of which were respondents who work in the Ganges Village area and use transit occasionally to a bit more often, and a minority had never used transit before, which is, it's always good to get those voices as well. So some key results from this engagement were that most riders use transit for shopping, errands, social and recreation activities, as well as work. And respondents wanted more connections to ferries, more flexible service, more frequency and span, as well as service to more areas. So this has helped frame our service priorities for the next 5-ish years, which include additional Fulford Harbour peak service, year-round Beaver Point and Ruckle Park service. This next one I think touches on maybe one of the questions that I've seen in the chat, but a flexible Ganges shuttle as well as rural trip windows. Separation of Fernwood and Walker's Hook routes for additional peak service. Reallocation of some of the Salt Spring connector resources to improve spans on routes 3 and 5. So have them running earlier or later. And later weekend service to Long Harbour. So all of these initiatives have associated costs and requirements, and they'll be assessed and prioritized and implemented as possible. Furthermore, we've got some future infrastructure priorities, including additional bays at the Ganges Exchange, an operations and maintenance facility plan, which would be really awesome. We've got improved waiting areas at Vesuvius Bay Terminal on the list, as well as improving bus stop amenities. So we completed this plan, as I mentioned, just late last year, and it outlines all the information that I've summarized here. So please take a look on the website if you'd like to read through. or just for more information. And you can always shoot me a note. I think my details are in the information for this presentation as well. So next, I'll touch on electrification of buses. I know that's a pretty hot topic, and it's also a very high priority at BC Transit. So first, I'll have to apologize. I'm not the subject matter expert on our electrification transition, but I'll do my best to elaborate on our current situation and plans to electrify our fleet across the province. So first off, where we are now, BC Transit is committed to transitioning to a completely electric fleet by 2040, with roughly 130 vehicles, electric vehicles being acquired over the next 5 years. And our first 10 will be deployed in Victoria later this year. So this is a step in the right direction, and there's still a lot more to do to introduce electric buses in all our systems across BC. So specifically for Salt Spring, how can we get there? There's a few challenges that I'll outline, namely the state of technology in the industry, infrastructure requirements, maintenance and technical support, and prioritizing deployments to maximize GHG reductions. So first, starting with the state of technology and the industry, the major focus of the electric bus manufacturers as of, I guess, the past little while has been on 40-foot heavy-duty type transit vehicles. And while the industry is beginning to expand towards other vehicle types, peer agencies have seen some pretty significant operational hurdles with early deployments of those other types of electric buses. Salt Spring operates a fully light-duty bus fleet, so smaller buses than the heavy-duty types, and there are multiple companies that are in the early stages of development that offer light-duty battery electric buses, but they're still not road-proven. GM and Ford notably have committed to electrifying their cutaway chassis platforms, which are currently used as the base for many of our light-duty vehicles. However, this announcement has resulted in huge demand, creating challenges in ramping up production as well as supply chain shortages. And it also appears that their rollout will be a little bit slower than initially forecasted, so that's another constraint. Moreover, we've seen that light-duty battery electric buses are a bit further behind the heavy-duty segment in terms of commercial readiness for transit service, regular transit service, and they're continuing to advance. We're confident they'll get there, but the issue is that current options are very range limited. They're not well tested in transit and have, again, the supply chain and support challenges. So this means that there will likely be a need for extra contingency buses, and as such, those will be used for demonstration or pilot vehicles so that their disruption to transit service is limited. We'll gain some valuable learnings from those initial deployments, but it'll take significant effort to deploy and keep in service. And right now, just due to the state of the industry, our priority is on the heavy duties for now. Next, I'll touch on the infrastructure requirements. So we have to consider where the vehicles will charge, determine if there's capacity from BC Hydro. We need to ensure that the charging location is permanent. We have to select appropriate equipment and provide backup power, as well as determine ownership of the infrastructure investment. So this evaluation is a pretty significant undertaking and must be concentrated on where it provides the greatest benefit to our customers, to our partners, and most importantly, reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So some transit blocks on Salt Spring Island, and a transit block is essentially the work that a bus will do in any given day. They can be between 200 and 300 kilometers, which is far beyond the range of current light-duty electric bus designs. And that range can also be significantly impacted by temperature. Also, the current designs for light-duty buses have been built on platforms that were initially designed for combustion engines, which is further inefficient. So there's more work to be done for sure. There's also less passenger capacity typically in light-duty electric vehicles, but that's hopefully going to change. And we'll also need to test these new models in terms of their vehicle envelope for our standard corridors and all that good stuff prior to implementation in transit service. As for maintenance and technical support, additional training would be required for staff who operate and maintain these vehicles, as they'd be likely working with multiple vehicle types, you know, traditional diesel as well as electric and whatever else there might be. And this includes technical support as well as parts and maintenance capabilities. And hopefully I'm not going over here. Lastly, I'll touch on our prioritization of deployments to maximize GHG reductions as well as operational efficiencies. So we're going to prioritize the deployment, and it'll be based on the following considerations. Can the battery electric buses serve the network efficiently, i.e. is the range sufficient? So those transit blocks, are we able to achieve those in an efficient manner? We also want to make sure that the equipment is going to be there for a long-term period and it's in a fixed location and there's sufficient storage space for the vehicles. We want to ensure that there's capability to support and maintain the vehicles. And then lastly, probably most important, that the return on the efforts invested is maximized. So if we have, for instance, 10 battery electric buses, it makes a lot more sense to deploy them all in one location versus you know, sending them to 10 different locations in BC, just so that we only have one set of infrastructure to support those 10 buses. And it just makes things a lot more efficient, and we end up, you know, saving more GHGs, which is the whole point. And lastly, you know, we're following the market closely. Light duty battery electric buses are anticipated for operation in Victoria's Handy Dart network, which will coincide with the completion of a new facility designed to accommodate that new fleet. I think there will be 6 tentatively. And learnings from these buses will really help guide our next steps in the light duty battery electric bus rollout. So that's pretty long-winded, but I'll leave it there. And if there's any questions, happy to answer them.
Thank you so kindly, Tristan. I'm going to ask one question, and it's very specific to a particular area on Salt Spring Island. And the question is, can we please get a bus route number 1 to be brought down Corbett to Crofton Brook to service the 100+ residents? BC Transit has said no in the past, but it is a big barrier for many of the tenants, and we could reduce car ownership collectively. IWAVE, which is Islanders Working Against Violence, for example, has offered that they would pay for the bus shelter, and this would increase riders on this route.
Yeah, that's a great question. I was just taking a look at that quickly, and I think that the Route 1 services Crofton, but that Corbett section there, I understand we're not currently serving that. One of the issues I see is that it's you know, a dead end route, which is never a great idea for transit service. You know, it's not to say that it can't be done, but it's less efficient and something that we definitely need to look into more. And in our service priorities that are outlined in that document I kind of summarized earlier, we've got an option for a flexible Ganges shuttle, which would be some form of a digital on demand or something that aligns in that category, which could be utilized to fill that gap. So hopefully that answers the question. And if there's more follow-up, always happy to have a chat with whomever asked that.
Okay, that would be great. That was Keysai, and we will definitely request for your documentations that we can share it with the Islanders as well, the registrants as well. I'm now going to pass it over. Thank you so much, Tristan. I'm now going to pass it over in the interest of time to Adam to introduce our next panelists.
Made it back. Sorry, I'm in the process of leaving my legislative office. Just give me a sec. I will just have the document in front of me. My pleasure to introduce Justine Stark. Justine and I have been in a number of meetings together over the last 5 or so years, actually longer than that. Justine Stark is a registered professional planner and has worked with the communities of the Southern Gulf Islands and Salt Spring Islands since 2007. Before coming to work for the Capital Regional District, Justine focused on affordable housing and sustainability planning as the Islands Trust Planner with the Trust. She's currently the Manager of Service Delivery for the Southern Gulf Islands and spends as much time as possible with her family. Spring Island, buddy, Justine Stark.
Thank you, Adam. Hi, everyone. That's nice. So delighted to be invited to present at this event today. And it's a quick one. So I'm going to share my screen and get started. As Adam mentioned, I work for the Capital Regional District for the Southern Gulf Islands electoral area. So as you know, Salt Spring is a different electoral area, and the Southern Gulf Islands electoral area includes Galliano, Maine, Saturna, Maine, and the Pender Islands, as well as some smaller associated islands. And so our electoral area director, who's Gary Holman's colleague, is Dave Howe. And we have also here today the alternate director for the Southern Gulf Islands, whose name is Paul Brandt. And Paul is also a trustee for Saturna Island. So Paul's on a number of committees and commissions, and that I work with Paul in a number of different ways. Today I'm talking about the Southern Gulf Islands Integrated Transportation Program. And this is an effort for the Southern Gulf Islands to establish a transportation service, much like Salt Spring has. The Southern Gulf Islands doesn't have a transportation commission currently. And in 2018, our Community Economic Sustainability Commission made a formal request that the CRD establish a commission and a service for Southern Gulf Islands. And so we've been working on advancing that request. It came from islanders with a vision of a multimodal integrated system where we would be supporting community buses and public transit on the islands, as well as active transportation routes. And we would connect the islands with passenger ferries beyond BC ferries. And so the idea would be that folks could take a passenger ferry from Salt Spring or from one of the other islands, and when they arrived at their destination island, they would have a mode of transportation that wasn't dependent on the private automobile, so they could catch a bus or, ideally bring their bike with them on the ferry and ride across the islands. And it's based, this has emerged over many years. Actually, a lot of different plans and studies have brought us to where we are today. An interesting and important one is called Experience the Gulf Islands, and that's something that came out of a community member on from Galliano Island, advocating that, like the Salish Sea Trail that you're advancing, that we establish and Experience the Gulf Islands network, similar to his background was with Experience the Fraser. And it was a tourism-based proposal to look at sustainable tourism in the shoulder seasons, but it also incorporated the idea of a spine trail over the islands, like the Salish Sea Trail, but including the Southern Gulf Islands. And so we are, my team with this Capital Regional District engaged a consultant last year, and we did quite a thorough and robust community consultation process. We talked to stakeholders, other agencies, experts in the field about how we could bring a transportation service to the Southern Gulf Islands that was right-sized and practical for the islands. Like Salt Spring is a population over 10,000 people. Southern Gulf Islands in total has around 5,000 people. So when you're talking about the economy of scale being difficult on Salt Spring, it's also even more difficult on the islands, which are all separated from each other by water. So we on the Southern Gulf Islands, now actually I'm on Salt Spring right now and I identify as a Salt Springer, but I guess I identify as a Southern Gulf Islander too, because I support them through professionally. But on the Southern Gulf Islands, we have community buses that are grown, serving, in some cases, serving the islands with volunteer community bus societies who are, on the borderline of viability. We have a lot of community trail societies that are building, in some cases, active transportation paths and also recreational trails on the islands. And we have parks commissions also who are in the business of building trails. But we don't have, without a transportation service, we haven't had the ability for the CRD to respond to a request. Say the community buses have asked us, we need $10,000 to get our bus running this year. Can you do that? And we haven't had the authority within the regional district to give that money to that bus society. And we haven't also had the staff or the capacity or the authority to go after the federal infrastructure grants. And we're looking at, this new active infrastructure money that the deadline was today, and we weren't able to apply for it. So really what we've been asking the communities of the Southern Gulf Islands is, do they support a transportation service? And we've been we've been costing out and going through service model planning to figure out like what that would look like given the low population and the geographic context of the islands. So our community engagement, I missed a slide. Our community engagement was quite robust, and I put this up here because we wanted to test the assumption that, you know, a transportation service is something that islanders think they need. And indeed, it is. We had incredible results to our engagement. Our surveys saw, you know, 2.5 thousand people engaged. We have an interactive website that had some community mapping abilities. We had surveys and ideas, tools, and quick poll questions. And really the point of this is to say that we endeavored, like we worked really hard to reach islanders, and we got quite a good response back, and you know, from across the board. But in general, we saw the majority of people wanting to see improvements, wanting to see safer active transportation corridors on the roads, make it safe for walking, cycling, make it easier to get between the islands. And so we also, when we did bring the numbers to the community, we found that there still was a strong community support for an integrated transportation service, for the CRD to go through the process of establishing a service, which requires a referendum and requires CRD board approval. So we are just in the process of bringing the results of this study to the CRD board for consideration, and we are going to be going to referendum in the fall. The service model that we're proposing, it's right size for the islands. It has to be. We are under no illusion that, you know, just because we establish a service that we'll be able to build separated bike lanes across the spine of the Southern Gulf Islands. And so we're proposing a service that would kind of be like a basket, a placeholder to receive grant funding, to coordinate the volunteer efforts of the groups already doing transportation work in the islands. Like Salt Springs, Southern Gulf Islands is a volunteer economy. We see the community buses have been really successful, and they have, because they're societies, they have the flexibility to meet the change in demands and the change in ridership that we see with seasonal fluctuations and you know, unusual travel patterns on the islands. And they have the ability to charter their buses for weddings and things like that. So there's what we're doing with our service is we're proposing a bylaw that would have a granting function in it, that the community bus societies and the trail societies could apply for a grant to support their operating or capital costs. And that's just one way of kind of what I think is very, very wise, what Adam was saying about, you know, work with what you've got. This is part of our goal with this as well. We know that, you know, maybe for the active transportation component, one of the first pieces would be traffic calming measures, signs, education, awareness, sharing the road, and that, you know, our long-term goal, of course, would be separated active transportation corridors that are multimodal and can accommodate wheelchairs and cyclists and trailers. But you know, we'll start small. First, we need to just get the ability to receive the grant, to hold the tenure for the license of occupation along the roadside, and to support the community in providing the service that it wants to do for itself with our community bus societies and our community trail societies. So the role of the CRD would be to coordinate, to do strategic planning. We would be, if the referendum's successful, we would establish a commission that would have representation from each of the islands and from the trail societies and the bus societies. I know that something that was really, I think, attracted Transition Salt Spring to request me to speak to this is this idea of the inter-island transportation, and I've kind of just glossed over it. So I'm gonna go back to that slide actually, because just to show you the map, did I miss it? This is why, you know, no one else did a PowerPoint. I wonder sometimes. Yeah, so this is the, I lost a slide. This is the map. It's not the map I wanted to show. But the idea of connecting the islands beyond BC ferries would be a geographic, economic game changer for the islands. We know that there's, like, historically, there was a lot more connection between the islands. There was, you know, and there is still today where you're sharing services, you'd be able to share service more easily. We have the nurse practitioner living on Main and serving Saturna currently. We know that the students travel every day to Salt Spring to go to school, and that those parents can't necessarily make it to Salt Spring to see the after school play or during the school day to, you know, attend the productions. And then those Southern Gulf Islands students have to rush back on the water taxi home and can't participate in after school activities. So there's a big push from Southern Gulf Islanders to have more frequent travel, especially to Salt Spring. And we know also that the Southern Gulf Islands Tourism Partnership has picked this up, and they've got this Aqualink pilot, which we've been collaborating with them on and learning from, and it's really exciting. They're going to be running it again next year, but it's the seed. So if we do establish a service, if the CRD board goes there and the voters approve it, we'll be able to initiate those partnership conversations with the school district and with Aqualink and the Southern Gulf Islands Tourism Partnership, and build that economy of scale and work together, because we know that we can't, you know, achieve the vision on our own, but if it's our responsibility. We know also it's a climate response. It's the transportation and road-based transportation is the biggest emitter of greenhouse gas emissions on the Southern Gulf Islands as well as everywhere, right? So without even having the option to shift that transportation mode, we're going to get nowhere basically on our climate response in the Southern Gulf Islands. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to leave it there because I think my 10 minutes is up. I'll invite Paul Brent if you would like to add to anything I've said. I've skimmed over the details in the interest of time, but I'm sure there might be questions. So please.
I'm going to jump in a little bit, Justine, here, just to say that we are hearing some chatter around an electric Aqualink, full, you know, year round as being the ideal, and sort of anything more that you or Paul would like to say about what our best chances are for getting an electric year-round Aqualink that could take kids back and forth to school and us back and forth to the other Southern Gulf Islands?
Well, I don't have a lot to say about that, except that from my understanding, the short distances between islands are the most effective for an electric vessel. So I'm not sure if that Trincomalee crossing would be the first crossing to use an electric boat for. But Paul, do you have anything?
Well, we did look. I know that one of the operators in our Tour des Îles, which was a pilot project that ran for 5 years, but just one 3-day weekend where we connected the islands with small boats, basically 12 to 6 passengers, and they were investigating a company by the name of Torquedo that makes electric outboards, but they're just not substantial enough, or weren't at that time. Now I do know in Scandinavia they have a number of, they're innovators when it comes to electric water taxis, electric ferries. So they have Copenhagen is now operating with, I think, up to 7 smallish water taxis, very similar to the situation in respect of buses. The market is not just there yet; it is coming, but it's bleeding edge at the moment. And the one thing we don't want to do is invest in bleeding edge, because there's a reason it's called bleeding edge, and there's often a lot of teething pains with these. We'll call them new technologies, and certainly new technologies. I see that a potential realistically in 5 to 10 years that we could see that type of technology here. And as Justine says, we have the perfect spot for it, because we're talking distances of between a lot of the Southern Gulf Islands of 4 to 5 kilometers. So, and we have at the Capital Regional District, great public docks. So it's something to look forward to in the future.
Well, we certainly have a willing community who would love to help invest in that infrastructure. So if some innovative partnerships are possible, let's do it.
Yeah, thank you. And we will be knocking on Salt Spring's door if we get a transportation service, because I think that our transportation commissions might want to team up on a few projects.
Darlene, is there any questions we want to ask? I know we're getting behind. Actually, I'd like to actually just ask people if folks are folks happy to stay an extra 10 minutes, because we've had a lot of rich content here. And if you'd like to stick around, maybe put your hand up or just say in the chat if you're good for 10 more minutes, that would be really great. It'd be great to complete the evening with all of you.
I think we can just go ahead, Brian, and those who would who need to go can go. But I think we should wrap her up with your beautiful question.
Oh, okay, sure. So panelists, that's Paul and of course Justine, who we just heard from, and Tristan and Donald and Bob and Gayle. That question I posed to earlier on, that vision question, you know, we've got a drone, we're flying over all the islands, or a low-flying plane, or human-powered vehicle over the islands. What do you see in 2050? Maybe starting with Tristan.
All righty. Well, I'm a bit of a data nerd, I would say. One of the things that I would really enjoy having is it relates, I guess, to the, getting there green, but more data capturing on all of our transit vehicles so that we can make informed decisions that help us run a more efficient system. That in turn leads to a greener system. And then let's get rid of all vehicles, only buses. That would be great. But yeah, that's my transit nerd side. So
data is destiny. Wonderful vision. Paul.
Much like Tristan, I'm flying over and I'm seeing pretty much the existing roadbed. And I'm seeing very, very, very few cars, or we'll call them cars, or maybe minivans or vans, because I'm a big believer in autonomous vehicles in that kind of time frame. And I think what we'll see with autonomous vehicles is way fewer cars. I don't know about you guys, but I've got a truck and 2 cars on my property right now. Nobody's using them. And so autonomous vehicles, I think, are going to allow us to be able to share the roads with pedestrians, cyclists, electric cyclists, and do so in a safe fashion. And so that culture that Adam Olsen talked about, that island culture, will be assisted through technology. And we're getting very, very close to that in urban areas. So that's what I see. Not many vehicles, lots of cyclists out there amongst those people that are comfortable, kids riding bicycles and people walking. So there.
Love it. With us, paint a picture. When you paint a picture, it gives us a destination. Thanks, Paul. Tristan, Justine, what about you?
Well, I think it's very practical and realistic to imagine that we'll be using the existing roadbed. But if we're talking dreams right now, which is what I would love to see, is to actually have active transportation routes that follow the topography of the island and find the ridges and aren't tied to the road if we're on Salt Spring, or even on the other islands as well. If we could make those deals with the landowners and address the liability and have galloping gooses it's a rural experience to ride your bike across the islands, and you don't have to deal with cars at all.
Beautiful, beautiful. It's a whole new type of visitor coming here too. Gayle, what about you? Going backwards.
I'm afraid that I'm going a little backwards rather than forward. I'm seeing something where people walk through others' property with rights, with hedgerows, and have the little gates that you open so the sheep don't have to run away. And a place where maybe is a little more backwards than we are, and a lot more rural. And when I started thinking about coming here, I thought, I don't need a car, I can have a donkey. Well, I'm probably not going to ride to town in a donkey, but there are ways to be able to get there more easily and more rural and more fun. So my picture of Salt Spring in the future is one where we wander through people's property with impunity, cycle, and of course, don't have nearly as many cars.
That's beautiful. That's really great. Going backwards in time to data to Bob.
Thanks. I'm going to go for slow. I think that, and I'm going to pick up on Paul's point too about autonomous vehicles. One of the things about autonomous vehicles is if you're sitting inside the vehicle, not looking out the windshield, and your seat is flipped around and you're talking with somebody and you're not driving, the drivers cause all the problems. So if you're not driving, your car could be going 10 kilometers an hour. You wouldn't even really know it or notice. So I think and the other thing that I'm realizing is in the Netherlands in particular, a lot of places they're just simply sharing the roads. Yeah. So especially if you're in the village of Ganges, it's nice outside of Ganges, you could have a separate path, but in the village itself, just make sure it's slow. It's and if you have primarily autonomous vehicles and they're going 10, 20 kilometers an hour, you're not going to have a problem, and you're going to have a lot more good for the businesses. Nobody's blasting past your door. They can stop and, oh, look, there's something cool. I'm going to go buy it.
Sounds like Bob's got a cure for road rage too. Love it.
Yeah.
Donald, you have the last word before we wind up.
Oh, the last word. Oh my goodness. Thanks, Brian. Yeah, well, I guess come back to a point that Adam made. I think we have to appreciate what we have now. We live on this paradise island with no paid parking and with no traffic lights. And I hope in 20 or 30 years that will still be the case, that if traffic volume dictates that we put in roundabouts, which we all know are both safer and greener than traffic lights. And I also am very, very conscious of this whole question of affordability. We are a very small island. We have such a small tax base. I think we have to be very, very focused in what we ask of our political leaders. And I don't think we can come to them with a whole basket list of requests. Very, very focused. My focus, particularly with respect to making this island more pedestrian friendly, comes down mostly to speed limits, frankly. And so I hope in the future we will see maintenance of the somewhat quieter, more rural lifestyle that we have on Salt Spring that we all enjoy, which is the reason many of us came here. And I hope we cultivate a culture of community mindedness, including individuals that sometimes object to even beach access on existing Ministry of Transportation right-of-way because they don't want people walking by their property. I mean, we need a culture of community mindedness, and by keeping it affordable. Thanks.
I hear a lot of social change in what you and Bob said. It's wonderful. I forgot Adam. He's got vision too. So let's add that to the mix before we wind up tonight. Adam, please.
Well, I really appreciate the opportunity to participate. I think and to hear the ideas of everybody, and part of what my job is to take those ideas and coalesce them and try to make them come to life. So I appreciate them. The one thing that I'll add to all of the visions is a different idea than I think we have right now. As someone pointed out to me, they said, "Oh, you don't like Trans Mountain Pipeline, you don't like bitumen." He said, "Well, didn't you know that there are controlled bitumen spills all over your neighborhood right now? They're called roads." And so I think that my hope is that we are able to develop and design a different road surface treatment that it doesn't pollute so much. And part of that is that, to what Donald just said, is that we understand that not every road needs to have bitumen put on it, or asphalt put on it, as we call it. That there are different road treatments that can be used and more easily maintained and more cost effectively maintained. But we have this perspective, like we need to drive fast everywhere. We also need to drive fast on big paved wide roads, because that's been our expectation. So challenge the idea of what people think is the norm, think outside the box, and then work with the community to make it happen. And I hope that that's what we have 50 years from now, are really collaborative, open, engaging communities that are interested in trying new things.
I love it. Thank you, Adam. That's really great. All of you. I mean, basically what we're getting here is a bit of a cocktail napkin on what the world could look like. And we need to be doing that always, because I think it instills hope. So thank you to everyone. This was really inspiring for me personally, and I hope to you folks who are here. And just as we end the evening, we have thanks to give to you, but also to the foundations and charitable partners and other organizations that make us tick. You folks made it tick tonight by donating to participate. That's all part of a recipe that helps us do the work we do to serve our island and to help meet our climate change needs. So thanks to all these wonderful organizations here. Also, we've started a sponsorship program. We've got at the tree level, we don't have gold, platinum, silver, that would be just so yesterday. We've got tree, branch, and leaf. And so our tree level sponsors are Whirlwind and Moatsharm Hardware. And our branch sponsors are Fresco Refrigeration and the Home Design Center. And a couple things that are coming right up. We have programming. We have the Climate Action Coach Program, and we will be launching next week. We'll be launching the wood stove upgrade rebate. So up to $750 in rebates. That'll be for the heat pump option, but there'll be opportunities to get rebates for $350. And this will be on the Southern Gulf Islands, but also on Salt Spring as well. So it's really wonderful to have all of the islands captured. So please sign up to our newsletter if you want to know about when these things are happening and the details of how to take advantage of them. And the folks who are participating, the companies that will be with us on the road are mentioned down below. I'm really excited about that program. Later in the spring, we'll have the part 2 of the rainwater harvesting rebate, which was also very popular. So, you know, it's human beings that make this tick. This is our board. We all work so hard, not paid a darn cent, right? And we love what we do. It's from the heart. And we also are thrilled. In the past year, we've gone from 1 part-time staff to 5. And it's really, really wonderful to see the team we have. They're responsible for making all this magic happen. And we're paddling with you. And we are grateful to have you with us here tonight. And we're grateful for the donations that folks are giving to give us the blood that flows in our veins that makes it possible for us to do more of this programming, to get more change happening. Remember, no government is actually successful at addressing climate change without its citizenry. And we have a great citizenry here. So we really need your help to make it happen. And we have really good news. We just became, thanks to Gayle Baker, who took one for the team. We are now a charitable organization, so we will be able to issue charitable receipts at the end of this year. We're just kind of getting our feet wet, wondering how the heck, where's the light switch on this whole charitable organization thing? And I know we're getting briefings on that, and I'm really excited about that change. So please do become a monthly donor, on a one-time donor, come to our events. It's all good. And we have some really great programming that'll be happening this year. We have a climate change arts festival that will be happening in September. It's another really great way to get to the people, to bring everybody on board so we can have as many people in this boat as possible, paddling as fast as we can down the turbulent waters that are ahead in our community. So, you know, my very deep gratitude to all of you for being here tonight, for all of your questions, most of which we couldn't even respond to. But remember, we've got a commitment to work with Adam and hopefully Robert to do more of these, maybe some deeper dives into some elements of the transportation theme that we can do to really make change happen on our island. So thank you so much to all of our guests. Hats off to all of your amazing hard work on this island. So great meeting Donald and Bob tonight, and Paul. And great to have Tristan here as well, Gayle and Justine. So thank all of you. And I wish you all a good night full of wonderful dreams. And I think we got you started on those dreams tonight with the visions we have. So thanks everybody, and all the best to a good night.
Thanks everybody, bye.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Sleep well, drive slow.
Right.
Thanks all.
You're very